Thank you. I'll be brief because we're nearing lunch, but maybe say a couple things. The reason why Christine Lowe asked General Mosley and I to come was to put a global context into the conversation of this dialogue. And the fact that we're today on Policy and Action Day, it's really important as each of us think of our specific pieces of what we're doing about this issue of climate. We also need to look at the larger sets of things that are happening, which in fact will affect policy dramatically. And so what I'd like to do is just for a couple minutes put a couple of those kind of things up, and I think I'll take the prism that General Mosley and Jeremy gave about their grandchildren and just talk about what it's now fairly clear what is going to be the guiding, the major thrust of the world for the next 30 or 40 years in the peace and security field, which is what undermines and gives the business and financial sector the stability that they're looking for, gives all of us the potential to continue to lift billions of people out of poverty and to move forward, that there needs to be basic peace and security in order for economic development to take place. So let's just take a very quick review of what are some of the things that we know are already here and just run those by. One, we've already had references to the fact, I know when I was born, the world had 2.5 billion people. In the next 30 plus years, 2.5 billion more people will come on the planet. So one is this huge population surge. Second is the one we just mentioned about the enormous growth of the middle class, over 1 billion new people, depending on your measurement, up to 1 billion new people in the middle class, with demands of wanting to live a middle class life, which puts then to the third, and that is the resources question. If you look at any of the major studies that are now coming out of intelligence agencies, defense departments, et cetera, around the world, from Beijing to Washington to Brussels, to Delhi, to anywhere, to Brasilia, what everybody is saying is the same thing, that in these next decades to come, the major source of conflict in the world will be water, will be energy, will be food, and that nexus between the three. And in fact, recently, the National Intelligence Council of the US and the European Union's Strategic Studies Institute put out the first joint threat assessment, as they see it, the first time the NIC has done this with anybody, and looking globally at what the next 40, 50 years will look like. And their single biggest preoccupation is, do we have the ability to deal with the effects that are going to take place because of the extreme weather, because of climate change, because of these issues? We're talking about mass migrations of people, preparing for mass migrations of people on a scale not known before in mankind. We're talking about whether it's too much water, rising sea levels, or not, or no water in places like Yemen, which is something should focus all of our attention, and many other places around the world. Availability of water, let alone clean drinking water. If we don't actually look at, when you project these kinds of things together and you look, we are talking about a huge, huge problem for the international community, and we are totally unprepared for dealing with it. There are no international institutions that know how to deal with it. There are people that are thinking about it. General Mosley mentioned about the militaries. There are a lot of others that are working on, again, all of us are working on our pieces, but who's actually working on the overall issue? The issue of jobs is something, the word hasn't been mentioned yet, but the word jobs is really huge, because when you look at that 2.5 billion, and you even look at the people that are here today, we talk about part of the world which is graying, and that presents its own set of challenges and transformations for the planet. At the same time, we've got something that we haven't seen before. Societies with huge population growth where 60% of the population is under the age of 25, and there is zero job creation. Zero. There's violent extremism. We've all seen it. We've seen it, and we're going to continue to experience it in every part of the globe. This is all related. All of this is related. You talk about what happens in Bangladesh when the water rises. What's going to happen? Tens of millions of people are going to have to move basically all at once. Who's preparing for that? What are we doing? Who in the international community? Is the United Nations doing it? Who's doing it? The whole concept of national and international security is fundamentally challenged. Traditionally, in climate discussions and dialogues, you would not have a voice. You wouldn't have a 4-star senior general from the United States. You wouldn't have people from the security community. But what we're arguing with you now is and you notice there's like 3 of us here out of 600. Because we're still new to this, but because this has now become something, it's morphed into something, which is much bigger than any one of you or me or any of us. And that's really the kind of thing that I'd like to leave with you today, is this enormous scope of challenge. Now, what's it going to mean for today's Policy and Action Day? What it's going to mean is that the world community is going to be faced, each nation, cities, people, all of us are going to be faced with huge things on the scales never seen before. We look at the Pakistan flood and we say, wow, that's one of the biggest floods ever. And people say, that's just a precursor of what's going to happen. How do we deal with it? You have already in Beijing, you have the PLA being told that they have to begin a plan to move a large part of the emphasis of what the military will do to be in disaster and humanitarian relief. General Moseley talked about the possibility of thinking out of the box. What if the Chinese, American, Europe, EU, and other militaries were to actually think about how do we deal with this? We're working together on piracy, which also, by the way, is all part of this whole same nexus that we're talking about in the Gulf of Aden I'm referring to. So if you think about this, and where do you go for this kind of policy? Who makes those decisions? The answer is there's nobody. We now have, just take the Gulf of Aden with piracy. What we have is an ad hoc coalition. For the first time in 600 years, Chinese ships went that far away. And they're together with Indian ships and NATO ships and Russian ships. And there's a loose mechanism of coordination. But what when this becomes much more serious than a situation of piracy from Somalia? Because it's going to happen, and it's not just for your grandchildren. Most of us are going to experience, our children are going to live it. But what are the consequences for instability, for economic growth, for jobs, for all these things we talked about for the next generation? So the time is basically out, so I don't want to take too much longer here, but just to say that I hope that this general challenge that all of us take ourselves as human beings, as citizens, as everything, and just think to ourselves, there's a much bigger challenge that all of us are trying to do. And we salute all, as General Moseley said, we salute, the security community salutes those of you who have been working on this climate issue. And each of you have done important and are doing important work. But all of us have got to come together in a very, very different way, because if we're going to have influence on policy, and we're going to take action on what's really happening in the big picture, the challenge is something really unprecedented. Thank you.